Alright, let's talk about how to place multiple buildings in a row in Railroads Online. There are mainly two ways that I found. First up is the use of a third-party tool, like I used Railroad Studio in order to place down all of these cooling towers. But there are also some tips on how to do this manually without it being impossible. It's still gonna take a while to do it right, and it's kinda complicated, but we'll get to that in a moment. But yeah, for Railroad Studio, all you want to do is place down the amount of buildings that you want. Put them all roughly where they should be, so you already know where it's kinda going, and you don't need to do much guesswork in that, as it's only like a file editor and it doesn't really show much in terms of the stuff live that you are doing. So yeah, you place down the stuff, save it, upload the save to Railroad Studio, which will also tell you where the save files are located. Then you do your changes, and afterwards you download it again and put it back into the save file folder. This one I actually made it quite easy on myself by not only using Railroad Studio, but by also making this entire station line up with cardinal coordinates, or cardinal directions. So this is a straight east-west track, which means that of all the coordinates, I only need to adjust the one going into this direction in order to have a regular interval in between buildings. There's of course also ways to do this if everything is on an odd angle or something like that. You would just likely need some triangular functions in order to figure out the exact coordinates. But it is possible. I just made it very easy on myself here. Now onto the manual way on how to handle things, and this actually, it's a bit tough and needs a bit of preparation. And it's also, I don't know if I can properly explain everything, so better watch the entire thing through first and then get into building it and not just following it step by step, because it's gonna be a bit tough on figuring out where you actually want to build or place the temporary stuff that's going to help you out if you don't know what you're doing yet. So to start out with, you need to know an area, and you need to know your direction you want to go in. Also, it helps to have placed the building down beforehand at least once, because, for example, if you just want to build a row of these buildings, it's actually, well, kind of a bit easier. And you see how it's just always in front of you. If you, however, want to do it with a cooling tower, which also needs to be very precise in order for the track behind it to line up, you see how it's just off to the side. So keep in mind where the building is going to be relative to where you're looking at, because a lot of this stuff is going to deal with where you look at. So first up, I'm going to place down the building. It's gonna use the sandhouse here just for well, basically only being able to put on a stone wall. This one needs to be aligned with where you want the entire thing to go. So it needs to have the same angle as the track that you are going to build, or the angle those buildings are supposed to be at. So I'm just gonna use this building in order to place down the wall high enough so I won't be able to just walk on top of it when standing next to it. So yeah, this is now blocking me from going any further in this direction. And yeah, this whole stuff is going to be temporary. You want the sandhouse to be towards the end of whatever you are building. If you have uneven ground, you should also consider just adding some embankment for where you want the buildings to be, so that they are all evening out. And not just going with different heights and all that, because especially for the cooling towers, that would be pretty fatal. So do that beforehand. And if you are walking on uneven ground, also make sure that you add something that you yourself can walk on right next to the wall here. So something like this. And next up is going to be for spacing. This, by the way, is only here as a temporary measure, so you can walk in a perfectly straight line and just place on the stuff like this without moving your camera at the end. Also make sure to press yourself against the wall to make sure you don't just kinda wander off in one direction like this. But yeah, this is just for keeping everything in a line. Now we come to keeping everything at an even distance. For that, we first up need to find out what distance you want between the buildings. For example, I figured out that the hoppers that I use as a measuring stick here are 8.2 meters apart, and I'll be just implementing that from this point on, starting out with just a crossroads over here. And now let's get into just placing down track, which is the exact amount of length that you want between the buildings. So 8.2 meters, then another 8.2 meters, and you just repeat that as many times as how many of the buildings you want to have. So just gonna do it like 1 or 2 more times. Just something like this, and that should all be good. So for example, if you want to place down multiple ones of engine sheds, you can just place down one like this and then place a track in parallel to it and just see how long it takes to get to the other side. Now it's not perfectly in parallel, so the measurement is slightly off, but it should be something like 21.2 meters. That sounds about right. So that would be your increment there. Now we go back to the crossover parts. And we just want to add another few of them. These are basically to make it clear when we have traveled the right distance. So I'm just gonna add one to this side here, another one over on this end. That's the wrong end. It should always be on the same one. So for example, in this case, the track is always junction is always overlapping with the next piece of track. And if I place it like this is alright. Like this again. And now I have one at the very end. So this is our scale for the distance to travel. Now the next thing to do is line yourself up and get a focal point on the left end where the crossovers are. For example, you could maybe make it a point that you place on the building every time you don't see the beam anymore in the bottom left corner, or when you don't see part of a track anymore, something like this. It's not 100% precise, but it's actually something we should be able to work with. So for now, I'm going to just place on the building every time I don't see the edge of the beam anymore. And now to the actual stressful part, which you may need to do a few times over. Now the big thing is that we need to line this up with our whole track here. So I'm just gonna take a look at how the pillars at the bottom come through the track, and if it looks all even, then I guess it's good. And from that point on, it's by the way very important that you don't touch the mouse anymore. I mean, you should be touching it because you need to click it, but you should not be moving it anymore. So if you want to do this very precisely, this might be it. So I'm now just moving with the keyboard, but not with the mouse anymore. Gotta resist the urge to do anything like that. And now let's go to the first point where I don't see the beam. This would be the first building. Now I need to go into the menu and select the building again. Once I click on the building, I may not move the mouse anymore. And now I'm just walking alongside the whole thing and waiting to get to my to the point that I made out. And I'm just gonna do it like 2 more times here. So if you move your mouse, it's not gonna line up. If you didn't line up a building correctly, you're gonna see that in a moment as well. Likely what that looks like. I think I may have just moved the mouse. Let's see. So that's gonna be it for me placing down these, and in a perfect world these would now line up I think this one is a bit further. This has a bit of an angle to it. Yeah, definitely notch the mouse over a bit. This is what makes the entire thing very tough. But I think the rest of them I actually got quite close. And this might be something, again, that you will be repeating over and over until you get it right. And yeah, it's a bit tough to find the spot to connect the track to. Ah. There it is, and let's just get rid of circle mode. So I think this should be usable track right now. This might be a bit odd. No, it's kind of okay, but again, with me knowing that this is slightly tilted, I would need to do the entire thing again now. I don't think I could necessarily rely on everything else working out, especially the height you have your camera at also changes how where exactly the building is placed. So if you make a mistake, you better start over from scratch. So all the buildings will be deleted and then you start anew. As I said, this is meant to make the things a bit easier and possible to begin with, because just doing it freestyle with nothing to take as a measuring stick, nothing to have as a reference, it would be almost impossible. But that doesn't mean that this process is easy by any stretch of the imagination. I was actually pretty lucky with it working out right away, although there is a bit of a slight curve in between them, but it should be alright. So yeah, if you want to build something like this and you don't want to use Railroad Studio or something, you better prepare for doing this over and over until you get it just right. Also, I noticed that due to me putting down the track over here, these things came up a bit, so gotta be careful about that whole process. Yeah, there's a lot of things to consider here, and depending on what building you want to have, it also switches up quite a bit. So this is more like a general guideline on how to make an alignment, how to get a scale that has some landmarks in regular intervals. And that's about it for this video. I hope it was somewhat useful at least, but as I said, it's not easy. Thanks for watching anyways, and I hope it helped out. Till next time, bye bye.